Got it.
Great. Anybody here new for the first time? Okay, I thought it was all familiar faces. What I thought I'd do today is take a trip back to the 1939 New York World's Fair. And what I did was I have, as you know, might have meant, imagined tons of pictures from it, but I went for a couple selected albums that I'm working on restoring. Basically, you get a lot of things where some people go out to the fair, they take 4, 5, 10 pictures. They're always the same ones. But every now and then you get somebody that goes out and really went at it, took a lot of pictures, and you end up with an entire album worth of them. Um, and then you get to see sometimes some different views, or some, if the guy was particularly artistic uh, photographer, you might see a different angle on it. So I grabbed a few different albums that I've been working on. I thought I'd go through those. And then at the end, I have a newly restored movie of a home movie that somebody took going out to the fair. So we'll get to see a whole bunch of black and white pictures, and then we can see how beautiful it all was in color at the end. Last week I had some problem with screen sharing. I did test it and make sure that it worked. So let me go here, get my screen. Okay, so the very first album here is actually before the fair was open. As I mentioned in one of my books, they had public days at the fair during the construction phase, so that people could come out, see the fair, and basically so the fair could do two things. They could generate word of mouth, start getting people excited about it, and it also generated revenue. Each of the people you see in these pictures that paid admission to come in. So we'll go and you'll see buildings like this. The building's up, but none of the artwork that's going to adorn it is in place. A lot of the statues are missing. It's very much a work in progress. But just think how cool it would be for those of us, particularly from New York, who got to the '64 World's Fair, if we had been able to actually walk inside and walk around and see it as it was being built. So we're going to take a look at some of the pictures. The New York City Pavilion is still being built. You can see scaffolding and a little crane up on the roof up there. If you look off to the left, the Trilon is in its steel configuration, doesn't have any of its cladding on it yet. So a lot of the buildings were not open for the interior. You could just walk around, see the outside. Some of them had small displays of what was coming up in the future, most again on the outside, because work was still underway. This was about 9 months or so before the fair was ready to go. Office building at the fair, get a different view of it. The fair had very nice offices. It was the first building built and occupied. And during the construction, they would bring VIPs out to come and get a lunch out there. They had a very nice dining room. So this is the fair's admin building. That's the Grand Central Parkway. Cars whizzing by on it in the foreground. And again, first building built, you can see the Trilon going up in the background. As I mentioned, these pictures and some of they're working on, so there's still all sorts of dirt and scratches, that sort of thing. And some of these, others are cleaned up. Just more construction, all sorts of piles of lumber. Up in the left of the scaffolding, that was called the star pylon. You can see the little star shape up at the top. Again, big crowd of people down here as I'm moving my mouse around, all going around where the lagoon's going to be, and they're all out taking their tour of it. To give you an idea how popular these days were, here's again the crowd outside the New York City Pavilion. The press coverage of these events was very favorable about people getting excited about seeing the world of tomorrow. They mentioned the crowd size as being large, but indicative of how big the site was, that it was able to easily handle the large number of people coming through here. And again, all these people had paid to come in and basically see a construction site. Kind of interesting. Towers going up. This is over near the Chrysler building. Lots of people wandering around. Some of the buildings are now getting artwork put on the outside of them. As you can imagine, you don't leave it all to the very end, but it's definitely a phased process. You got to build the building, the artist is working off site, and you got to put it in place. And then you can imagine the project management that goes into place to make sure that not every artist is trying to install their work at the same time. What they also did was they hung a lot of these banners, like you see stretched around here, sort of eye candy, because a lot of the buildings did not have their murals or their artwork applied to them yet. Here we see the Trilon and Perisphere going up. The Trilon is much further along on the left. The structure on the inside is the central support structure inside the Perisphere, which is now going built out to the side. Uh, Lots of steel, amazing construction. When you look at all the intricacies of building this and realize it was all done by people with slide rules and no computers, it makes it even more impressive. But also it's kind of interesting from the OSHA point of view, the platforms hanging there that people would just stand on the wood platforms hanging up there and be working on it. The admin building, again, the statue, if down below, if her feet were not cut off, would proudly say 1939. Because again, this was supposed to be the 1939 World's Fair. All the nomenclature was the 1939 World's Fair, not the 39-1940 World's Fair. Previously mentioned in other talks, they had planned with the hopes of having a second year, but to get through the Bureau of International Expositions in Paris, they could only announce one formal 6-month period. So all the merchandise will say the 1939 World's Fair or the 1940 World's Fair, because legally they were two separate entities. But in actuality, a lot of the contracts had verbiage in on that. If there was to be a second season, you have the right to participate, et cetera, et cetera. So again, another view of it, 1939 New York World's Fair. This was one I had used this picture, or not this picture, but another one like it in my book. This was called an aqualon. It was a street light, so you had streets. The light went through the column up in the center and lit up and reflected off the distant top. And if you look inside, you can see fish swimming around. So it's basically lining one of the streets of the fair were a whole line of these aqualons, and fish got to swim around as the people went by. And at night, they got to light up, and I'm sure it did wonders to the fish biocycles, having light 24 hours a day. But you know, the sort of thing we would not do today, the poor fish. I always feel bad for them, because also I think about the sun hitting these things in summer. I'd like someday to find out just how many fish the fair went through in keeping the aqualon stocked. And they had a guard force brought on board. Make sure, again, you're going to let all these people come in, make sure they don't take any souvenirs home, make sure they don't go straying off the beaten path. But again, the press reports of the thing was that the crowds were very well behaved, no incidents or anything going on the site that caused any problems to occur. Here's an interesting example of how they had to do things to get the fair ready. This is the communications building, which, as we'll see in later pictures today, had a beautiful set of murals on the outside, but they weren't done yet. So rather than having the people come and look at just a giant blank wall of no interest, they went and made specific banners and hung them up to dress up the fact that the buildings were not yet finished. Off to the right again, you see the Star Pylon being constructed. And just kind of a neat view. You have temporary wooden fences, snow type fences to keep people off the grass and everything they were desperately trying to grow to get into place. The Trilon is almost up to the top. It's getting ready to put the outer gypsum panel skin on the outside. But just it's coming together. The world of tomorrow is not too far in the future. So let me jump from the construction days, and we're going to take a look at the first of the albums that I had in mind. Here we go. So this is a very nice set of large black and white prints that somebody had put in an album that I took out. I've been scanning and restoring. The first 10, 12 or so are fairly well cleaned up, and then we'll get into more dirt and scratches. As I mentioned in the talk about photo restoration, you cannot do much with black and white prints, particularly black and white negatives. You can't use the dirt and scratch remove feature. The silver in them dries them off. Again, with prints, you can try to use some of the features, but prints, if you scan it at a high resolution like I did, you also pick up every little bit of dirt, scratch, and everything. So it takes about a half hour per picture to get them back into a reasonable sort of shape. But here we see the lifesaver parachute drop, which is now out in Coney Island just as a monument. But here at the fair, it was a amazing thrill ride. Originally developed as a way to train parachutists for the military. The idea was you would go up to the top and drop you down and get a feeling of the shock when the ripcord goes. And it was a super popular ride at the fair, and then after the fair at steeplechase out on Coney Island. Port Estates, again, if you were able to see this at the full resolution, the signs and everything are absolutely perfectly readable, all from the prints. Amazing detail you could pick up from a good sized camera. Take a look at the mural off to the left. We see it now in black and white. In a little while, we're going to see it in color, and you really get a better idea of just how vibrant the fair was. In this particular case, the Court of States were a area, as you might imagine, for various states that were grouped together. Most of the state pavilions were in this particular area. A few New York, Florida, a couple others were out scattered around for various logistic reasons. But when you went through those arches here, you would find all sorts of state houses from the past that had been rebuilt using old plans, old photos to see it. And this guy out here on the right running a little thing, he's got one of his push chairs. And if you really want a nice ride through the fair in comfort with his shade over your head, he's more than willing to take you for a ride. I love the old Woody wagon there. I don't know whose that is or why it was parked there while the fair was open, but a car like that would be a real classic to have these days. We're down in the amusement area, the Scroll of Life, adults only. Big thing is mentioned. The most thrilling and intimate show that you will see at the fair. I love the barker. If you look at him, he's got a megaphone mounted on a pedestal, so he doesn't have to hold it up all day. He can just stand there and yell and try to get the crowd coming in. But a PA system would probably be too expensive, so you just get a megaphone and you yell at people. So these are the sort of things you would see over in the lake amusement area. You can see in the background the roller coaster going over there. Off to the left, Tommy guns. You got to shoot simulated airplanes and blow them out of the sky with Tommy guns. All sorts of crazy, amazing things that you would find over here. And if it was, even though it might have been a mild-mannered show, by putting adults only on it, you would definitely get a higher amount of people coming to buy your tickets. Mentioned before the Court of States, this is sort of thing you saw with the different states. A lot of them went to a lot of expense to build these pavilions. A lot of them were done with stone or wood that were brought in from the individual states. So they would proudly show you that this was real genuine West Virginia stone as opposed to imitation stone from New York. Lots of expense to quarry these, build these, and put them up there again for what was initially planned to be a 6-month activity. We're coming out of the Trilon and Perisphere, standing on the Helicline. There was actually a PR guy that worked on the staff of the World's Fair, and his task was to come up with Greek-sounding names for things to make them sound more impressive. And he did a great job. He was the guy that came up with names like the Apollon for those street lights. The Helicline sounds much better than ramp down to the ground. So he was very famous for coming up with a whole bunch of these, and very proud of his effort to make them sound neoclassical. And then people would try to say, what is a Trilon? What is a Perisphere? What is the, where was that from history? Well, these were things the guy had made up. Again, take a look at this particular picture. The flowers are kind of interesting in black and white, but we're going to see it at the end of the talk in color and make you wish that color photography had been a bigger thing in this period of time. The Schaefer Pavilion boasted they had the longest outside bar in the world. So under the columns off to the left, there was a giant bar that ran around the outside of the building, and you could go in belly up to the bar, and for your nickel, I think it was, get yourself a freshly poured Schaefer beer. And we're going to see Ballantine. There were a whole bunch of beer companies that had big, big pavilions at the fair. People still had the memory of Prohibition not too far in the past, and the beer companies were trying to get you to come and buy as many of their beers as possible. This is when I got a real kick out of having been a Boy Scout and having worked at the Boy Scout exhibit for the 64 fair. Boy Scouts of America service camp, you see in the background, they had the teepees and that. Well, these scouts actually got to stay and live at the campground at the fairgrounds, and I think they did it for either a 1 or 2 week assignment. When 64 fair, they did not let us stay on site. We stayed at a nearby military base, an old World War II era barracks, which was a story unto itself. But these kids, imagine the thrill of being able to stay overnight at the World's Fair. I don't know if I'd get much sleep at all because I'd be out walking around the fairgrounds at night, taking a look all over the place. But they stayed out there, and then at 10 o'clock in the morning, visitors were welcome to come in. By that time, they had finished their cooking fires for making their breakfast, and they had cleaned up and ready to go. And you had all sorts of exhibits on Boy Scouts and tying knots and Indian war and all the other things that we Boy Scouts love to do. But I love the thought of staying there. There was also another camp, particularly in the 1940 season, where they brought American military soldiers in as the war was getting closer and America was trying to show you that it was getting ready for war. The soldiers would come out and they would demonstrate close order marching, gunfire drills, that sort of thing. So you had the Boy Scouts staying overnight. You had the soldiers staying overnight. You also had an Indian village, and the Indians were staying overnight. So there are actually about 3, 4 different spots in the fairgrounds that people are camping out and living overnight, which is, to me, just be a real dream. Chrysler giant exhibit, not as well known as the Ford pavilion, where you got driven around in chauffeur-driven brand new Fords that were demonstrating the new marvel of air conditioning for cars, or General Motors Futurama, the biggest show at the fair. But Chrysler did a nice job, despite always being #3 of the big three automakers. They had a very impressive building full of the latest cars and exhibits. Here, this is interesting because this album jumps between a mixture of 1939 and 1940 pictures. You can see this big white sign over here, New York World's Fair in 1940. They put a whole bunch of these up all over the fairgrounds because they had changed so many things between the 1939 and the 1940 season that people were getting lost because pavilions they were looking for were no longer there, or they had new names, or they were totally gone, like the USSR pavilion was totally gone and a totally different one the American Commons put in its place. So it's a great way of telling if you're looking at a pavilion or a picture from 39 or 40, if you happen to spot these signs. In the back was the City Light, an amazingly beautiful diorama of the city of New York, exploring the city, how it was powered by electricity. They had underground cutaways of subway trains running through it, of elevated trains running through parts of it, cars, lights, all sorts of things going on, these great fountains outside. So the City Light presented by Consolidated Edison. United States Steel, they want everybody to stop building wood and masonry buildings, start building steel buildings. And let's put our steel on the outside, sort of the Pompidou Center in France, 60, 70 years before its time. Put all the steel on the outside, everybody can then see what steel can do. And it can now give you an amazingly large amount of exhibit space inside because that whole dome-shaped roof is held up by those pillars on the outside, not needing to hold it up like a traditional building would if you weren't using the amazing steel product. Going along here, the water in the front is the river that was the Flushing River had been captured and rechanneled for the fair. A couple of the state exhibits, Missouri and the state of Washington over there. You can see in the background, the Trilon now has its coating on it. I believe it's the Turkey Pavilion right down underneath. But for the folks that go to the fair grounds today, you can only imagine how nice it was before the entire Flushing River was channeled underground. It actually flowed through the fair site, went out to the Lagoon of Nations, which is now the Pool of Industry. But you had a lot more open water and green space going along it. The Yankee full-size clipper ship as part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts display. Again, one of the big white signs telling us it's 1940. The Yankee will again look at this in black and white. We're going to get a real quick glimpse of it in color and realize just how bright some of the paints were used on it. But the Yankee was a great ship. There were people that swore they could feel it rocking under their feet. It was not a real ship. It was a fake ship built on ground with water just surrounding it, but a very popular exhibit. Another popular exhibit was DuPont. They were demonstrating how you would make amazing new things like nylon. The days now of silk stockings were disappearing and you were coming up with nylon stockings. And if you were very, very lucky and a lady could go out and win herself a free pair of nylon stockings and take them home. Out in front, tremendous set of props of, retorts and vessels and things that did absolutely nothing but lit up and looked really nice in color and making you feel like you were at a giant chemistry lab. What's interesting is the massive screen work that's up behind the building. It's a great way of taking the eye and making you see something that's much, it's smaller than it is, but your eye now starts thinking DuPont, massive, giant pavilion. The actual building itself behind it, you can see, is not overly impressive, but your eye is kind of tricked into thinking that this is such an impressive structure. There's got to be something really to it, and DuPont's got to be a really kick-butt company that they're able to afford and do this. So it's a really great design motif, again, that you take your small building, stick something in the foreground that's really impressive, grabs the eye, and you're not really paying much attention to the building behind it. You're looking at this giant tower and the grid work behind it. Very, very impressive design. 1940, again, we had the big show done over at the Aquacade 39, Billy Rose's Aquacade at the New York State Pavilion. They also decided they would do another big show, America-themed show for 1940. So lots of people out there. The number of people that were in these shows is truly impressive. And despite the number of people, they all made a profit. The shows, the 64 World's Fair, the shows were a big failure because people said, I'm not going to go to the fair, paid admission, and have to wait to see a show. There's so many pavilions to see for free. Well, in 1939, people were more starved for entertainment. Television was just coming along. Stage spectaculars were much more commonly accepted. So the big stage shows in 39 were a huge success. The Aquacade made a bucket of money. I mean, bucket of money. And that's what, unfortunately, falsely encouraged a bunch of people in 64 thinking they could capture magic again, do the same sort of thing. And the 64 versions flopped because audiences in those 25 years have come to expect something totally different. One of the big shows that was popular was the Railroads on Parade show. It was a history of transportation across the United States. They would bring out, and here you see how people would have to go across by a covered wagon, limited by how fast you could get them up over the mountains in a day. And in just a moment, you'll see all sorts of trains and wonderful things come through and how railroads had made things so much better. Again, massive show, very well attended. Pictures of the crowd, it's almost always full to capacity. Going around the Lagoon of Nations, we switched over now to the unrestored one. So again, you can see some spots and dirt and everything. And over time, hopefully I'll be fixing the exposure levels and taking all that stuff out. But somebody said they'd like to see some of these work in progress. So here we are. So we're looking back across the Lagoon of Nations. You can see the French Overseas Pavilion off to the left, and down around the big Court of Nations down there, all sorts of smaller pavilions for the nations. That the Fair Corporation would build these, rent out space. They didn't need to build their own pavilions. Mentioned a couple of talks ago how a lot of the nations actually had two exhibits, one that was built by the government and one that was built by industry. Because again, the government was trying to show you how socialism or whatever their particular form of government was the ruling form of all time, and the companies were saying, we don't care about that, come here and buy our stuff. We're inside the United States pavilion area, a garden here, these little plaques on the wall, one for each of the states. Benjamin Franklin statue down below was a quiet area for people to be able to come out and just rest and take a minute away from the hustle and bustle. Westinghouse, again, another thing, put a big tower in the front. And this was actually an unneeded tower from my point of view because the building itself is pretty impressive. A lot of the buildings at the fair went with giant buildings of walls that they could put all sorts of things inside. Westinghouse went with giant glass exteriors. You can see the windows on either side of it because they wanted people to be able to come in and walk past, see the exhibits, go inside, and get more about the products. It also helped light them during the day. They didn't need to put giant bright lights in, which kind of an interesting thing. Westinghouse selling electric lights would like to use as many lights as possible, but it gave a much more airy, less confined feeling than some of the others. The singing tower out here at the front had water and music playing, and they lit it up with different color lights. This is also where they did the Westinghouse time capsule. So if you know where the fair is today and the monument that's out there for the Westinghouse time capsule, that's right where this pavilion was. We're also the state of Florida. They went way out of their way to build the biggest, I think, of the state pavilions, even larger than the New York State Pavilion. Really a big pavilion with all sorts of Spanish architecture reflecting what they might have seen in St. Augustine or other parts of Florida. Nighttime view, again, they're not stars. Those are dust spots that will go away, but we get a nice view of the backside of the George Washington statue staring at the Trilon and Perisphere, the fountains going with the jetting out into the water. Again, we got very familiar with this from the 64 World's Fair because using the same set of blueprints or floor plans because the infrastructure was left over from the fair, we ended up with very similar view of fountains. Venezuela, this one's going to take a lot of work to clean up, but another one that used a lot of glass. Great mural. It doesn't really show too well in this picture, but that long roof over there has a giant mural underneath the entire roof. And if you look inside the building, there's a giant mural all along the backside of the pavilion. I have a screensaver on my computer that rotates every 30 minutes a different background picture. And I have a really nice restored picture of the Venezuela pavilion that captures a lot of the details. Tremendous amount of work, a very modern, very sleek looking pavilion that really I thought sold the concept of come and look inside and learn about Venezuela very well to passerbys. Mentioned before the communications pavilion. When we last saw it, there was no artwork in front, no statue out front, just a bunch of banners saying 1939 World's Fair. This was how much the building had changed from the construction that we saw to less than 9 months later. The plants were in place, the statues were erected, and the artists had come and put the giant mural up there. A lot of these murals were actually done right there on the building. They were not done like say on canvas and reapplied later on. So again, the building had to be done far enough along that the artists could come in, because you can imagine a mural like this is going to take a fair amount of time to work. And I would think that in some cases they probably had helpers, doing parts of it. And some of them it was just one guy or one woman working like mad to get it done. But again, how we take a blank wall and turn it into something very, very eye-catching. We're part of General Motors right now. General Motors had predicted that by this point in time today, we would all be walking on the upper levels of cities doing our shopping, and all down below would be the streets for the cars. And that way, cars could get through the streets without having to slow down for pesky pedestrians, and pedestrians would not have to worry about getting run over. So down below, if you looked at down below, there were about 100 or so General Motors cars, all the latest ones all parked. Up here, you'd walk around in comfort and safety, and then up above, you had all sorts of offices and display things that were part of the General Motors thing to have you come out and why you would like to buy a car. So we've never quite gotten to two-level cities yet. It's something out of the Jetsons. Maybe we'll see it someday. But that was GM's bold prediction. We're taking a look over again at the main, well, you see main over here. This is the state exhibit area. That armillary sphere there had originally been cast for the League of Nations over in Geneva, the artist made a copy here for the World's Fair. Very intricate bronze sculpture. Just a random view going by General Motors. You can see the train out there just under the General Motors sign. It's interesting how you take things for granted. Somebody put, I must have 40, 50 pictures of that train out there. Somebody in a group about New York City, transit subways and that I belong to on Facebook put a picture of the train out there. And my gosh, the reaction it got this past week of people trying to figure out what train it was, and people loving it that it was a brand new diesel, other people hating it because it was the end to steam. And I mean, just the amount of comments for something I take for granted. Oh yeah, there's the train outside General Motors. So I'll have to go and post some pictures out there and see if it gets more reaction. It's just funny how different things strike you differently. The USSR Pavilion was only there for 1939. They did not return for 1940. This was all taken down and shipped back to Moscow. The steel was supposedly used in the war effort. The statue up there was called the Bronx Strap Hanger by New Yorkers because it all looked like he was reaching up to hold a strap in a New York City subway. They had tried to make this the tallest structure at the fair. The United States said, no, we're going to make sure the Trilon is the tallest, and just to make sure there's no doubt whatsoever, we're going to stick a giant flagpole with a flag up on top of the Trilon so everybody realizes America's system is the best way to go. But the USSR Pavilion was very impressive. Again, all this is stone work brought over from the USSR. Giant busts of Lenin glowering at us, and Stalin making sure that we all knew that who they were and what was going on. But a very popular pavilion because people were all trying to figure out just what was going on over there in the USSR. There was also an American communist movement at the time that was making a big thing about how that was going to be the prevailing system of government in the United States. Just like General Motors, their prophecy did not succeed. Some of the statues out in the waterway, we have in the background, The Fate and the Times of Man by Paul Manship. Great piece of work, one of my favorites, the giant sundial out there, the Trilon perisphere in the background. Another view of General George. Here's an example of some of the sculptures that were put in place. This was on the outside of the AT&T building, if I remember correctly. Again, during the previews and others was here. These sculptures were lucky. They didn't have to all be done at the last minute like the murals had to be. So they could assemble these off-site, get everything ready to go, and then put them together very quickly during the final construction. Some of the stuff was different. We have this giant mermaid type of creature out here at the Pines Pavilion in the background. And these fish are spouting water. As I mentioned in the talk, we were talking about artwork. Hardly any of this artwork survived. Almost all of it was just done in plaster of Paris or in some cases poured concrete, but it was never intended to last. The artists just did not have the money to do these in stone or anything memorable. A lot of these that had water features like this, the water really wore away on some of the features over the period of time. So next to no artwork from the fair has survived other than pictures or in artist models and concept miniatures that they were doing their pockets as they were building it. Mentioned earlier in Ford, you'd come out and get a ride in a Ford. You'd stand on line, a Ford would pull up, you'd step in, the driver would take you around and give you a sales pitch on how nice and comfortably the Fords all felt. And my goodness, doesn't it feel nice if you've got air conditioning in these cars? Japan had a very nice pavilion. We'll see this a little more in color coming up real quick. It was donated to the city of New York as a permanent structure to stay in the fair site after the fair. However, the entry of Japan into World War II made a Japanese pavilion in the fair site a very unpopular addition, heavily vandalized and eventually torn down as a sign of anger towards Japan for their attack on Pearl Harbor. It's unfortunate. It was a very nice building, again, like many others, built with material brought here from Japan, a lot of exotic woods, and could have been a beautiful building, but World War II rightfully saw animosity that saw the end of that building. Czechoslovakia had started building their building, and they were not done by the time the World's Fair. Well, the building was done by the time the World's Fair opened, but Czechoslovakia was not there by the time the fair opened. They had been occupied by Nazi forces. Staying up on the building is about after the war ends. We all hope to come back. Sounds unclear. Okay, let me grab the headset here. Carol's just stepping in to tell me the sound's unclear. It's probably my air conditioner going overdrive. So hang on 1 second. We'll plug this headset in. Just wave if they hear me. Okay, thanks. All right, so Czechoslovakia had a big display about we're going to come back after the war. Inside, you could see exhibits of the life in Czechoslovakia before the war, but they also had exhibits of the Nazis invading and some of the horrors and things they had done and pictures that had gotten out. So the Czechoslovakian American community sponsored the pavilion, ran a restaurant. You can see the sign there for the Old Prague restaurant, very popular restaurant. But they kept raising money to keep the pavilion alive because the Czechoslovakian government could not fund it. They didn't, legally exist anymore. So the pavilion was there for both years of the fair, and it was again funded by donations. They had a bin that you could go in and throw money in, or donated by Czechoslovakians that were living in the United States. So a real testimony here to perseverance in the time of adversity. We're back up on the helicline looking down. There's Paul Manship's sundial there up in the future. This time we get to see the front view of George Washington, and way, way in the background, we see the Federal Pavilion and the various pavilions. Up, if you can see where I'm moving my mouse, another very tall pavilion, the Italy Pavilion, one of the taller ones. We're going to see that in color coming up in a few moments. I keep enticing you to stay around for the color, General Electric, a giant stylized lightning bolt, and inside the pavilion, you got to see man-made lightning bolts. It's kind of interesting that this lightning bolt was one of the last things torn down at the fair when the fair was being demolished, because again, if you tear the buildings and take the signs and the name off, what were the landmarks? So they left the lightning bolt as a sign for where GE had been when you were demolishing that pavilion. The star pylon, one of the last things taken down. Anything that a demolition crew could look across the heaps of shattered pavilions and figure out which pile of bricks they now owned and could take home. Canada had a very nice pavilion about life up in Canada and exhibits inside. Lots of stuff up there about the life up in the Yukon and other parts of things. Again, most people had not visited the Yukon Territory, places like that. Most people are from America anyway. So Canada was very big in trying to entice tourism up there, but also why you would like to buy your lumber from Canada, minerals and things like that. Mentioned beer before. Here's the Ballantine restaurant, done like a German beer hall. I think I have the menu from this in one of my books, a very popular spot to come out and just get something to eat and to drink. As you can imagine, this is the glass pavilion, a big sign made out of glass, all sorts of exhibits made out of glass, a mirrored sign in the back reminding you about glass. And in case you forgot, it was about glass. So you have planters made in the front out of glass bricks. You had fountains that were made out of glass panels. You had, of course, all sorts of different lights that were all showing what you could do with glass. Very popular pavilion to go in. And some of the people out there, these little glass bricks that are out here, they're both in here and in the walls of the pavilion. They were sold off by the piece after the pavilion ended, and a number of collectors now have some of these glass bricks left from the pavilion. I have to go into a second folder here real quick. This is a real short one. Looking down towards the Pennsylvania exhibit, various state pavilions lining off either side here. Railroads, again, we had a little thing I mentioned before, railroads on parade. Railroads were super, super popular at the fair. Back in the 33 World's Fair in Chicago, they had a huge exhibit area. They also put in a giant one here at the fair. They connected the train system of the area into the fairgrounds with a temporary track. brought the trains in. Some of them had to be brought in on giant flatbed trucks because they no longer ran under their own power. But they had both genuine antique railroads. They had replicas of some very famous engines. And they also had a massive model railroad because everybody was big into Lionel and American Flyer trains. You could go and see railroads on display, and tremendous, tremendous show. This one's going to need a lot of work, but we're getting into the Fountain of Nations. The fireworks are just like in the 64 World's Fair. They had bunkers out there surrounded by fountains that kind of masqueraded them. The tidal flow would go out. People would walk out on a walkway, load up the mortars to let the tidal flow come back in, cover the walkways. Fountains would go, and at night, the fireworks would go. This was one of the very first examples of a fireworks show synchronized to music. I don't have the details on exactly how that was done. For the 64 World's Fair, they used a computer tape that would pick up the tones and launch the mortars. I don't know how it was done here, if somebody's just sat there and manually synchronized it, but they had a soundtrack and a fireworks show that were somehow synchronized. And a more just views of fountains and Trilon Perisphere. Another view of the glass pavilion. This tower served absolutely no purpose whatsoever other than to be lit up at night from the inside so you could see the warm diffused light coming through all the glass blocks. And again, lots of those glass blocks have made it into private collections. Pennsylvania, a great copy of the State House. We can see the uh, parachute jump off to the side there. Again, what I really liked looking at this, how they had left so much of the river as a usable piece of the property as opposed to 64. They were determined to bury it as much under the ground as possible. I really wish more of it was still out and existing in the park site today. I think it would make it a much nicer experience. And off to the left, we can see the mass of the Yankee Clipper ship. More beer, this time from Heineken. You had a replica of a Dutch village. The boat just sat there, didn't go off or do anything, just bobbed up and down. But you had in the background, you could see the tower standing up for Frank Buck Brings Him Back Alive and his monkeys that would run up and down all over Monkey Island out there. The windmill turned, and I do not know if it turned by motor or if it turned by wind. My guess is because there's not a lot of sails material on there, it probably turned by motor, but in movies you can definitely see it turning around. But the major feature was down below where all the umbrellas are. You had a very nice restaurant that you could enjoy as much of the Heineken as one could afford. It was not a pay one, get as much as you want. It was buy as much as you want and stagger home. Switzerland, one of their two pavilions, again mentioned that there was a government pavilion and an industry pavilion. In this particular case, they were close together, so they linked them by a bridge you can see off to the right. Again, if you do things that are really clever from a design point of view, you can make a building much bigger than it is. In this case, the petroleum pavilion, you had a giant oil derrick behind, which was really nice, and you had the petroleum building. Well, that's not really so much a building as opposed to a steel framework. It's got a building up on top, a restaurant that you can go to, but down below there was actually fabric panels, bright blue fabric panels saying petroleum. So you can build a downstairs, you can build an upstairs, and then you don't have to build everything that goes in between out of expensive stuff. You can cover that. You have a steel structure going up and cover it with fabric panels, and your two-story building becomes a fairly inexpensive six-story building. Kind of a neat design. The UK pavilion, you can see off in the back, again, it's kind of overexposed. I'm going to have to fix it. You can see the top of the Italy pavilion, but the UK pavilion, all the flags out there come out. Great exhibits on UK history, but also starting to appeal to people. Hey, we're in this messy war with the Germans. Would you like to donate to our cause? So you had that in a lot of the pavilions that they were trying to raise money. They were also trying to get a lot of political interest because the United States at this time was trying to be isolationist. We're not going to get into the European war. These countries were pleading for their lives to let your politicians know that we need to have your old ships, your old airplanes, anything, please, we're fighting for our lives. So get your government involved. And they were successful in that. That's the end of that album. I'm going to go and jump over to another one here. And this guy is kind of interesting. He did a bunch of pictures that were both um, interesting pictures, but he also tried to do some interesting things with his developing and his presentation of them, as we'll see. So I looked up Mr. Frank Perk now. I thought maybe he'd be some famous photographer. No, he was a guy that lived in Brooklyn and lasted about 9 years after the fair before he passed away. I found his obituary, and now I have his photo album. So we're just gonna. I haven't had a chance to restore his pictures yet. So what I get a kick again, and I've mentioned some of the other things, is that film was expensive back then. You had to buy it, you had to carry it around, you had to develop it. So why would you take pictures of something? And today's with cell phones, you just take pictures of everything. You don't like it, you erase it. But here, people had to consciously take pictures of things, make an effort to it. And sometimes we end up with things that are just, for a nerd like me, kind of cool. Here we end up with a set of the drinking fountains off to the side. Over in the right-hand side, the building right where my mouse is sitting was the Carrier air conditioning igloo that was built out there. But he's walked through the gate and he's just so excited. He's taking a picture, basically the first thing that he's coming to because, wow, I'm at the World's Fair. It's pretty cool. And again, just pictures of wandering around, little various things. And here it looks like the people just strolling across the ground. Some of the things that are in the background are street lights or markers. I think this was at one of the stadiums where they had a car show. We're up on the helicline, looking down at the ground, various pavilions out to the background. And here's where he started getting fancy with some of his photography work. Don't quite know why he did it, but he liked to use these photo masks to, I guess it focuses your eye on the trilon and perisphere there. You can see the other bits of the pieces on the outside of it there, but a number of his pictures he did this. In some cases, I was frustrated because I really wanted to see what was masked out behind the picture. Well, we have business systems and insurance. Again, IBM was a real small company at the fair. They could not afford a giant egg and that sort of thing like we had at 64. So they had a small display inside here, along with NCR and other people that were making different various odds and ends. NCR had their own pavilion with their giant cash register. They also had a small exhibit inside of some of their other stuff to make sure you didn't miss it. Other exhibits of the insurance companies or bank vaults, all sorts of different things you might want for your business. Kind of a neat Greyhound bus over there going around, the official sightseeing bus. After the fair, a lot of these ended up being used to carry people in military plants for getting shifts between workers on their shifts, so they were repurposed. And again, just more street views going around. Coming down one of the ramps from one of the stations into the fair. And again, he gets artistic, but it kind of gives us a nice view of the New York City Pavilion still there today. Of course, in today's world, we'd be seeing the Unisphere off exactly where the Perisphere is here. Schaefer off to the left. We see, we can tell this is 1939 again because the strap hanger is standing far up in the sky in the USSR Pavilion. Some of the entrance towers, giant clock down below, letting you know what time it is. I'll just start flipping through some of these. I just, again, got a kick out of the different things he captured. You got a lake and a waterway. You have to keep it clean because, unfortunately, as there is a lake and there is things like paper cups and napkins, people will drop them in there. So this guy's out there happily cleaning our waterway for us out in front of the USSR Pavilion. More of the sculptures and sundial. We're inside of General Electric where they're making man-made lightning. Some of the gear used to do this ended up in the beautiful town of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where I also ended up when I got out of college. And they would use the same equipment that they'd use at the fair to simulate lightning bolts that they would hit things like a transformer that was going to be on a street light out in a neighborhood. What would happen if that got hit by a bolt of lightning? They would also bring in a full-size airplane, particularly fighter planes or wings from a passenger jet, not the full passenger jet, but they would bring those into the facility and they would zap them with a lightning bolt to see how they would occur. So my facility was right next door to that part of GE, and often they would tell us at 2 o'clock tomorrow we're going to be doing it, and that would let us power down all of our computers and everything because it did a real hell of a job on the electrical system in town. And every now and then they would not tell you, and all of a sudden your computers are all shut down. Everybody in town lost their TV reception, and GE would promise not to do that again. But if you knew they were going to do it at 2 o'clock, it was really impressive. We'd all go out to the parking lot because my parking spot directly overlooked it, and they would fire these suckers up and just start sending lightning bolts out. It was really cool to watch. And again, they actually reused some of the gear from the 39 World's Fair for those tests. And the stylized lightning bolt. We're outside the New York State Pavilion right now. This was a monument. You can see the bridge going back over to the main fair site, and this fellow out here is coming and telling us that we are getting over to see the Aquacade area. Another view from the helicline. Sundial. Oh, and again, take a look at this black and white picture. The compass rose down below, northeast, southwest. We're going to see that in color very soon. Promise, promise. We'll see it in color, and it's so much more vibrant in color. It's astonishing the difference it makes. All sorts of different flags. These were not any particular flags of nations or states or anything. They were just flags that done to look pretty, just like they had done for the 64 World's Fair as you went across the bridges, just different styles and shapes, just to attract the eye. Mentioned before, some of these circular things were around an arena. This is the Goodrich show. Remember which? The name's Goodwitch. And they were out showing how their tires were being done in the stunt show. They would run around and jump cars over people and run around on two wheels and everything. The same stuff we later saw in the Auto Thrill show with the 64 fair. And he's getting ready to go and thrill the audience here. And in the background, you could go over to Churches and get a chicken dinner restaurant. Well, this is kind of interesting. This is a, sculpture done by a socialite in New York City, Grace Vanderbilt Whitney. And she didn't just endow the artwork with her money. She actually was an accomplished artist herself. And I think this was called the Human Flight. I'm not sure I get the exact name. But she had done this sculpture. And in the back, you can see Michael Todd's Hot Mikado show. This sculpture is one of the few pieces of artwork to survive from the fair, and it was announced it was going to be put on display outside the administration building of LaGuardia Airport. Donated to the Port Authority of New York, and then has disappeared and never been seen. Nobody knows where it went. It was successfully taken down. It was donated to the Port Authority. They did announce they were putting it up, and it has not been seen. So I am hopeful that someday in some warehouse somewhere, this piece of artwork survives. And it's really a shame because she spent all the money to make it her own money, and she also spent all the money to preserve it of her own money, donated it to the city, and the city has lost it. When you look at the size of the people in the foreground and you figure, how the hell could you lose it? That's got to be one big ass box parked in some warehouse. But the city has managed to lose it. There's no records of its destruction. So hopefully someday it does appear somewhere. It's sort of like an Indiana Jones quest. Again, great piece of artwork. Sad to think it's sitting who knows where. Again, more artwork did not survive the fair. All sorts of different exhibits, again, done out of plaster and not made to last. Speed, again, great thing. I think Rainier, Reneir, I think was the guy that is Joseph. This is another one previously mentioned sad story. This was the only major work done by a black female artist at the fair. It was called the Harp. She made this, raised the money to build it, and could not raise the money to save it. It was taken down and destroyed. It was originally supposed to be done in bronze. She could not get the money for it, so it was done in plaster and painted. But she could not even raise the money to get this back. And you look at it, it probably would not have taken all that much money. One truck could handle this thing away, but there was no interest in it. It was destroyed. A smaller one of her models does survive,
but it was a very well received piece of work. You can see it's outside the Contemporary Arts Center, and it's sad to think that for the want of a 3/4 ton truck or something, it'd still be with us. But back then, nobody cared; it was gone. And again, more artwork on the side of buildings, all gone when the fair was gone. No way to save them as they were applied straight to the building. The armory sphere mentioned earlier, the communications building, a closer view of that mural. The AT&T building, the 7 ages of man, and the telephone, and you have people happily talking to people on dates and making arrangements, and other businessmen and everything, and everybody's being real popular in the background. The one that ties it all together is Mabel at the switchboard, and she's making the world work. More of the business systems pavilion. And again, it's sad to think that pieces like this sculpture here, not big, not huge, you think somebody would have taken it home, put it in their garden someplace, or done something with it, all gone. Piece of the artwork mentioned before, that when we last saw this building during construction, there was nothing on it. Now it's all decorated nice and clean. Kodak, giant pictures, not as big as the ones at the 39 World's Fair, but they would put pictures up there. Again, black and white. Look for it in color. We'll get there in a moment. Bridge work, Japan Pavilion going front view instead of the side. One of the state pavilions. Florida, again, massive pavilion. Look at the size of this thing. It was really just a huge thing to encourage people. Come down to Florida. We have land you can see twice a day at low tide. Buy as much of it as you want. We have tourism down here. We have lots of oranges, all sorts of reasons you should come down to Florida. This is all pictures of Florida. This was kind of neat. We all get used to Disney audio animatronics. Well, here's Ponce de Leon, and there was an audio recording, and Ponce would talk to you, and he would move his mouth and turn his head a little bit, sort of a very advanced or primitive Abraham Lincoln. But Ponce would come and tell you why Florida was a great spot to come down and visit him. So it's kind of interesting. Disney gets all the credit for audio animatronics. Well, 1939, here was Ponce de Leon doing the same sort of thing. One of our impressive guards, like for this 64 World's Fair, a lot of them were New York police officers. They're working a second shift or happily retired and putting a uniform back on. Unlike the 64 World's Fair, there was no reports that they got out of hand. The Pinkertons in 64 were very badge heavy, got in a lot of fights, some drunken brawls amongst them. Not to say all of them, of course. I mean, a lot of them just did a great job, but there are some of the Pinkertons in 64 definitely made the paper for the wrong reason. The 39 40 World's Fair police force, very well received and well behaved. Just a random picture of a random worker at a random pavilion, unfortunately not labeled, so we don't know who he is or what he's doing. The bridge over to the admin building we had seen earlier. Again, the first building built for the fair. The average person could not go across this bridge. There was a turnstile and a ticket taker, a guard watcher just off to the right here. But if you were a VIP, you could come in. They would park your car for you. They would escort you into the fair. There was a dining room inside, or they would take you to one of the nicer restaurants at the fair and take you back pick up your car. Some stuff that was stuck in the album. We get a ticket here to go to New Orleans or Gardens on Parade, only for a quarter. And then we also could take a bus ride. And this is interesting when you see about a bus sightseeing trip through the fair. 50 cents was a lot of money to take a bus ride for a sightseeing tour when you consider what the price of admission was to the fair. Or for 40 cents, you could go see Ripley's Believe It or Not Auditorium, not auditorium, but auditorium. And Ripley's had had some success building these, strange things around the country. Put the display out there, and from the reports, they sold a lot of 40-cent tickets because a lot of people wanted to see the two-headed dogs and other odds and ends. Electric Power Pavilion. These circles that are a little hard to see here were actually giant portholes as you go inside. And well before the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland, you got to see the backside of water. Here's a view of the tunnel going into it. and a further view of it. And again, you can make out the darker spots where the portholes were. And we're in the electric light area. Again, pavilion in the background. This is one of the fountains that was outside the New York City Pavilion. I don't recall exactly what year was the last year they ran, but it'd be a shame if they'd be wonderful if they could turn them back on again. I think the plumbing's still there. And fountains galore, the League of Nations. And we have a small village out here. Oh, we're going to see a real small village in just a moment. The gardens on parade. Again, you could spend your 40 cents or a quarter, whatever it was, on a ticket to come and see different gardens. Signs that this garden was done by the so and such company, this one by that company, how you'd like to go and buy their stuff. Going back to the US Pavilion, a little bit of the statue works that was in the little quiet area there. And again, you can see here is a sculpture courtesy of so and such. This is the Daybreak Nurseries of Westport, Connecticut. All sorts of things that you could go and go to the kiosk. You could actually say, I'd like the plants that I saw at the Daybreak Nurseries area. Fill out a form, pay your money, and they would deliver them to your house for you. Okay. A funhouse mirror, and our photographer, his album, he's all Natalie dressed, and again, people dress so differently. He's wearing a suit, a tie. He's got his hat on. You look at people today; they're not so Natalie dressed. Mentioned a little village. This was Morris Guest's contribution to the world. He had a village out here where these people actually lived in these wall houses. So besides the Boy Scouts and the Indians and the soldiers and that, they had a bunch of little people living out at the fairgrounds. And you were encouraged to come out and look through their buildings, which is kind of talk about an invasion of privacy, but these people got both paid to be there and also got paid, got free, room and board during the time. So here it again, Morris Guest, Little Miracle Town, sort of thing we would not do in today's world, but midget or little people villages, whatever they were calling them back then, were very popular at quite a few World's Fairs. Another view towards Heineken. Frank Buck mentioned earlier his Monkey Land, the island, was reported by the press to be a particularly interesting place to be at feeding time because the monkeys were very, very vocal about wanting to be fed. George Jessel, a comedian that people may remember his name, he sponsored a pavilion in Little Old New York, and he had a whole bunch of interesting things like antique cars. These were not reproductions; they were actually things he had collected over time of things like a wagon that would be horse-drawn, pulled down through the streets of New York. So sort of like a stagecoach. You get inside, and this one would be, the Broadway line. They started adding things in there. We had mentioned in the talk about the 33 World's Fair how villages were real popular. Irish village, English village. That so we had an English village here with the old curiosity shop and all sorts of people dressed in British costumes and selling all sorts of British things. We actually Bobby's walking around. You had Irish villages and castles and dancers and all sorts of things that were fun. And I mentioned before railroads on parade. We brought in all sorts of trains. Some of them were the actual engines that the railroads had kept. Others, they used the original plans and built it. Most of the replicas that they built were actually functional replicas, not just something to look at, but they actually built brand new steam engines to the old plans. This guy had a booth. You could come out and you could pose for the picture in front of the train, and you could see the man and the woman in the background. And he's taking their picture, and for just 25 cents, you can get a picture of you with the famous engine. Or if you're your own photographer, you just walk around him and you take your own picture without paying him his quarter. And again, you have the stage shows, very popular. We're inside the Trilon. We're inside the Perisphere at this particular point. This is Democracy City. You would be up on these levels, seeing down below the city of the future and how it was all done. Huge crowds, the fair being very, very popular. And we're going to go take these pictures, need a lot of work. Merry-go-round, very popular. Frozen custard stand off to the side. Street Grinder and Monkey. I think this was still in old New York. These guys are very popular because they had come all the way by sled dog from Alaska, or I don't remember if it was Alaska or Canada. I got to check that. They made a big thing how they walk there under their own power. I imagine they were very glad not to be walking anymore. Out in front of the U.S. Pavilion, they had a major plaza area. They did all sorts of exhibits of marching troops or dances that. I've got pictures in my book of soldiers and that sort of thing in the 40 season. But in this particular case, they brought in truckloads of dirt, covered the whole thing, and they did horse shows out there. Another artistic view of the Yankee, all part of Massachusetts Pavilion here. And it looks like the crew is entertaining a young lass up front. She's getting to wear a sailor hat, and they're getting to take a moment away from sailing their ship. National Cash Register, the number at the top was the attendance at that point in time. So on this particular day, 196,201 people were wandering around the fairground. Again, for point of comparison, for those of us out here, that's about twice what you get at Disneyland on a good day or on a bad day, depending on your point of view, if you like crowds or not. So that's how popular the fair was, and how much they had a plan for how do you park the cars for that number of people? How do you make sure you have the bathrooms for that number of people? How do you make sure that you have enough water to flush the toilets for that number of people? I mean, building this world of tomorrow was a whole city onto its own. And we're getting near the end of this fellow's album, and we'll get to our long promised color movie in a moment. Italy in the background. There were again two Italy pavilions: the government pavilion in the background, and off to the right here, the industrial one, very close together. USSR. Not to be outdone, General George. And again, look at the size of that statue compared to the people down below at his base. They had hoped to redo this sculpture. It had been very popular and well received during the fair. And they looked to redo this in bronze as a permanent monument to be left for the city of New York. They were actively in the process of raising funds for it, and World War II came along that ended it. So this had been planned to be a permanent bronze memorial left in the fairgrounds that World War II put an end to. So that's the end of his album, and I will not go into any of the other albums because I won't keep you too much. But let me get to the uh, video that I want to show here. So let me just start that real quick. Okay, I am going to share that screen. This was an interesting find. I had bought a bunch of movies of the 64 World's Fair, and in it, I came up with going through them. What do I come across with a thing of the 1939 World's Fair that was in there that I didn't expect at all? So when you're sitting there and you're expecting to see yet more Unisphere and jumping porpoises at the fair, all of a sudden you end up with something else. So we'll take a quick look at it. I just finished doing this last night, but I think you'll see how the fair looks different in color. This was the original title slide the guy had made back then. We're actually inside Futurama now. Very hard to get pictures of some of these because they were not made to, be done with the photography, the film at that time. So it's not great footage, but it's kind of fun to see Futurama. He went real quick right side there. I mean, that's a real mind number. See the flowers, how bright they are, the red flowers outside, same avenue there. I wish he was going a little slower, but okay, there's the Compass Rose I mentioned, bright blue. Looking down among the rivers, more of the flowers, how they pop out in color. This is again viewed from the helicline. And there's General George, which he managed to cut off his head. Eastman Kodak, the pictures, they trimmed it in blue. The Court of States, and mentioned before the mural, black and white, nice blue and white. Japan. You wish, it's great to see in color. You just wish he was not moving the camera around. There's the Yankee, bright yellow stripes down the side of it. Romania Pavilion, more of the international pavilions looking up to the strap hanger. This next bit's unfortunately a little bit overexposed, but my mom talked, she loved the Italian pavilion, one of her favorites. And she talked about, the sound of the water coming down and how impressive it was. So a little tribute to Marconi at the bottom, looking up to the top. And that was the end of my unexpected surprise. So Greg Airbar is trying to get back in. We'll let him in. His phone has bad connection. So anyway, that is, Beth is saying Frank Buck was quite a character, sort of a mixture of Indiana Jones and Jack Hanna. Yeah, he really was. Back on Long Island, it was actually next to a drive-in theater out on Long Island. The Frank Buck had a animal farm out there, and it was really cool because you'd be out at the movie. I remember we went out with the Boy Scouts. We were watching the movie Zulu with Michael Caine. And off to the side, you'd hear these lions roaring at night, elephants trumpeting and everything. And you're watching a movie about Africa, and you're getting all this African sounds, but it was all coming out from the jungle land right next to us. So, oh yeah, and somebody else's, I just see Richard Herring mentioned jungle camp to Massapequa, Long Island. 150 monkeys escaped and only 100 were recovered. It makes you wonder where the other monkeys got. Actually, I think I had neighbors that were probably from there, but yeah, it's funny. I was just remembering that that camp was right next to the giant movie theater, which is now a shopping mall torn down. So anyway, that's some recollections of the 39 World's Fair. I will go through the chat here and try to answer any questions or comments. But if anybody has any thoughts you would like to throw up your hand or wave frantically, I'll be happy to unmute you and bring you up. Kendall, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Just an FYI, the Whitney, Grace Whitney, Vanderbilt Whitney, she did the statue of William F. Buffalo Bill Cody outside of the museum in Cody, Wyoming, and it is still very much there. I don't know where else she did it, but I know it's his statue is there.
Oh, that's neat to know. I've been actually by there and didn't realize it was her. Yeah, what I got a kick out of was that she did not just endow the art, she actually created the arts, and she seemed to be pretty good at what she did. So that's why I have high hopes that someday that statue survives and pops up somewhere.
Yeah. Also, is that parachute drop, is that where Knott's Berry Farm got their idea for their ride?
It's a good question. There's so many of those drops or rides like that. I remember one at Expo 86 in Vancouver was very much like that. You went up and they dropped you down. And that was kind of neat because they had displays around the bottom of all other World's Fairs. You could look at the signage as you're waiting to get dropped. But yeah, it was actually built as a parachute trainer, and they built 2 or 3 of them. And then they said more money in amusement rides. So nothing's new. They just find ways to reinvent the wheel. But yeah, it's a great technology. Scott's saying being with New York EMS, a number of people climb up that thing. I think you're probably talking about the parachute jump there, Scott. Yeah, I imagine people going up that. It's easier to get up than come back down in some cases, I would imagine.
Basically, with all the big holes in the structure, people were terrified to come down after they went up. I remember clearly going on several jobs there, and for some strange reason, in the middle of the night, guys would climb up that structure, start screaming, "Get me down!" They call the police, they call EMS. I was the duty captain on duty. We get there, ESU would go up, and they would risk their lives because there were giant holes in the structure. For years, it wasn't taken care of at all until finally they were able to secure it that people could not get around it and get up into it. And now it's restored and no one goes near it.
Well, it's interesting. The fact it was done at night, do you think alcohol was involved?
Oh, I wouldn't want to make a say, but yeah, and other drugs. It was amazing. Guys would climb up 30 to 100 feet. Now the 30 feet were easy to get them down, but you get someone who goes up 10 stories. The ESU cops risked their lives bringing these guys down because you saw this thing moving, swaying. They would get all cut up and scratched up. Uniforms would get ripped. And they bring these dummies down and they'd be screaming, they'd be hugging, they'd be going nuts. And we'd take them to the hospital and then they would be charged.
Amazing. Yeah, well, my hats off to you. I do all my work on the ground.
Lucky.
Yeah, we run our share of nutcases, but on the ground it's bad enough. 100 feet in the air, I don't know. I think I would call in sick. So I have a fear of heights myself. So you're not going to catch me up on 100 feet on that parachute jump. Oh, great. There's different other comments here about, if you look through the chat, Beth has mentioned about Gloria Vanderbilt Whitney. Beth, did you want to mention anything more about her or Frank Buck?
Sure, I've got a couple of Frank Buck items, so I may need to turn my my background off, but this is let's see, let me turn my background off. I've got a brochure here.
We're just seeing your headshot, Beth.
Yeah, I'm trying to turn my background off so you can see this a little better, but well, okay. Give me just a minute. It's not letting me turn it off.
You get the same technical bug that I had last week, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Where you're getting that, Brent asked, West Virginia Pavilion, what happened to it? Sold as surplus, taken down, and never rebuilt. So a shame. But go ahead, Beth.
Okay, so I've got a brochure from Jungle Land from the 39 fair. And it's got some nice pictures inside. I mean, kind of fancy for a fair brochure, but and then another postcard. But then we've also got a one of Frank Buck's autobiographies. He'd written a book called Bring 'Em Back Alive, which was kind of his catchphrase back in the 30s. And then in the early 40s, he wrote a biography called All in a Lifetime. And this one is, we just bought it off eBay, but it's got a nice picture of him and it's signed. You see that?
Oh, that's neat.
So it's just kind of interesting to hear him tell his own story. And he does sound like just quite a character, kind of that, Indiana Jones type, traveled all around the world, kind of just an explorer and adventurer.
Yeah, he supplied so many of the animals for the zoos, both in the U.S. and overseas. And during the 39, he also had Frank Buck's Bring 'Em Back Alive was out at the 39 San Francisco World's Fair. So quite the entrepreneur. He was going all around the world. He had two major shows at two major World's Fair at the same time. And when I was at Warner Brothers, we ended up doing a show with Bruce Boxleitner about Bring 'Em Back Alive that was supposedly based on him. And that was really cool because we had a jungle area of our back lot and they would truck in all the tigers and that sort of thing. It was kind of neat to go and watch and, do all that. But yeah, the real guy, I've only read magazine articles. I've not read his whole biography, but he seems like one hell of a Indiana Jones guy, as you mentioned. I got to read more about him.
Yeah, and there was a Donald Duck cartoon in the 40s too called Frank Duck Brings Him Back Alive.
Right. Yeah, like I said, he ended up with the place on Long Island out in Massapequa Park, one of the two. And my parents took us out there a couple times as kids, and it was really kind of neat. And they knew who Frank Buck was. I think I was 10 or something. I didn't really particularly know anything about it, but they, they talked about having seen him at the World's Fair as kids, and they were now bringing us out there. And it was really cool to go to the drive-in, as I mentioned, at night and hear, all the, stuff over on the other side. It was hard to pay attention to the movie when you're hearing, trumpeting lions and stuff. So, or trumpeting elephants rather. So, well, great. Thanks. Yeah, some people have mentioned chats. There are other videos. Obviously, this one I showed was not a great video, it was just a throwaway in there. But I got a kick out of it again on how things like the murals on the outside of the pavilions look interesting in black and white. They really look kind of breathtaking in color. So I've been happily restoring films like Mad from the last couple of weeks. Found a bunch of them from Expo 70 in Spokane that I just am working on. Found some from Expo 70 in Osaka that are on my to-do list. So we're going to get to some of those, but it's always kind of fun when a neat, odd thing just shows up from time to time. So the 39 fair is one that I, again, happen to be particularly enamored about. I had never gone to it, obviously not born until many years after. But my parents going out, particularly my mom, her father was a New York City fire chief, and as such could get into the fair, I believe, for free or real cheap. So she went to the fair a lot more often than my dad did, who was on the paying side of things. But listening to their memories of the fair was what encouraged me. I've gone back to the fairgrounds in 1989 for a World's Fair show at the New York City building. And we were walking around the fairgrounds, and I was talking about, oh, can you believe that this was there? This was there. And my mother, no, 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 this was there. That was there. Well, she was remembering the 39 fair. I was remembering the 64 fair. That's what got me interested in it. So I really enjoyed particularly things like the, seeing pictures of Italy and stuff, because my mom had such great memories of it. So it's been fun to do 2 books on it. And the publisher is asking now what I want to do for my next book. I don't know if I want to do another 39 book, but I sure have lots of other pictures to go. So it's actually been kind of pleasant not doing a book for the past year and having time off. It's always one of those things. I sign up to do it. I'm never sure I'm gonna have enough pictures, get it done, and then at the end of it, oh wow, what do I do for the next one? So, and then some people want me to redo my Disney TV book, but I'm enjoying being retired with all my free time. Any other thoughts, people, questions, or anything on the 39 fair? Or Joey, is he still here? I think you had a few 39 artifacts you wanted to show.
Yeah, hi, Bill. Yeah, I just pulled this out. I don't know if you can see it. This is it's called Trilon Perfume by the Rubicon of Fifth Avenue Company, which I can't find anything else about. I think they're out of business, but they made a Trilon perfume and a Perisphere perfume, and the box is wonderful. And inside, this was sent to me by a very dear friend, Marlene Kernert. And that's what it looks like on the inside. It's sitting on a little slab of Bakelite, and the perfume is still in there. It's amazing.
How does it smell?
We never tried it. I was trying to get my wife Diane to put some on, and we'd hit the town, and but we haven't done that yet. So maybe we will. And of course, this is the seat back from, of course, the Aquacade seats. And I know everybody loves to see it, and we brought it on many of our World's Fairest gatherings. For those kids, young kids that don't know what the Aquacade is, we tell them it's a seat from the Titanic.
You went down and got it?
Exactly.
I'm just going to reach up for something that's on my bookshelf here behind me. And Joey, we can have a party. You can take out your bottle of perfume, and I've got a bottle here. It's half the thing of soda. This is from the Cotter Ice Company of Cotter, Arkansas. So I have a whole collection of bottles. Evidently, there were bottlers in both New York and bottlers in Arkansas that were Cotter, and I have about 12 different bottles from Cotter bottlers. But this one came with part of the soda still in it, and it's still sealed and everything. I'll open up and try my soda if your wife will put on your perfume.
It's a deal.
And if Scott's still with us from EMS, we might need to have both of us revived after that. So
Yeah,
I do have an antidote kit.
yeah, I'll have to get a couple EpiPens or whatever. So no, I it sits there and I look at it and I think, I don't even know what kind of soda it is. Probably cream soda or root beer, whatever. But
yeah, it looks like cream soda.
yeah,
That's what it looks like.
and I love cream soda, but yeah, it's just, people come in and, say, hey, you got a half a bottle of soda sitting up there. Yep. So, and it hasn't evaporated any that I've had it. So it's kind of cool.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate folks joining. I hope you enjoyed a trip back to the 1939. Like I said, a fantastic fair from my point of view for all the artwork and everything. That was one of my big regrets, that the 64 fair, they had not done more with the public spaces to, put artwork out there. One of the things I happen to love about the pictures of the 39 fair, but if you went to Expo 67 in Montreal, they went way out of the way to have artwork. I think probably the largest collection of any artwork at any World's Fair like that. And you get to so many others, and it's just industrial, and you move on and everything. And I think the earlier ones had a really great idea. And if there is ever another World's Fair around here, I hope they do throw some money towards the artists and encourage them to come out and do some of the work that we saw here. And again, even if it's temporary today, you'd look at something like the harp or some of the others. People would be saving this stuff today, but back then, it's overdone, throw it away, wham bam, thank you, man, gone, on to the next one. It's a real shame. So at least we have photos to relive it. So
Bill?
yes.
Yeah, a quick question about the artist of the harp. She had to buy that back?
No, it was hers to keep, but it was hers to haul back, and she couldn't afford the
I see.
money either to get somebody to the labor to take it, put it on a truck, or she couldn't afford also a place to put it. So she had really had to work hard to get the money just to build it. So it was hers to have, but she
Yeah.
had no money to take it or no place to store it. So she had to let it go. Real heartbreaker.
It is a heartbreaker.
Yeah. Well, and I see we have Dr. Carpenter with us. I think we all need to take a sigh of relief that Kenneth, would you like to tell us anything about reviving the Hubble telescope? I saw you said you're back online.
Yeah, it's been quite a interesting month. We've had a few times in the past where its mission has been threatened, shall we say, but this was certainly one of the more serious ones. Part of that is because we were trying to be very methodical and make sure that none of the simpler fixes would work. That's why you saw all the failed attempts, which got a little more negative press than they really deserve. But we were trying to, we had memory units and alternate computer processors that we could switch to without affecting the rest of the spacecraft. So that's what we were doing. That was taking so long. We were going through and flipping all of those and seeing if any of it would contain the problem. The reason we couldn't identify the issue right away is that we had very limited amounts of telemetry because of where the failure was, which was in a communications box effectively. So that cut out a lot of the info that we normally would use to track down the problem. In the end, after trying, very methodically one subsystem after another, we are pretty confident the problem was in a voltage regulator that takes the 28 volts that the overall spacecraft uses and down voltage, I don't know what the verb is there, converts the voltage down to 5 volts, which is what all of the instruments in the science instrument command and data handler is the device that was malfunctioning. And appears that voltage regulator that did that conversion has a problem, and it might not have failed completely, which also made it hard to diagnose, but it has a very tight hardware range on it. It has to stay between 4.85 and 5.06 volts. So only a small wandering, which is not completely impossible given the age of these things.
Right.
Circuit drift, it's called, as things age. So it may be that it's just wandering a little bit out of that range, but it's enough to trip
Throw
it
it
and
off,
keep it resetting itself. So we couldn't get any commands or data through, because every time we sent something, it would reset because it was out of range.
Now I just learned something new from you, Kenneth. Down voltaging.
Yeah, that's not good. Don't quote me on that. There's got to be a better words for that.
Yeah,
converting the voltage.
When I got my a degree in electrical engineering, I never heard of down voltaging. So, wow, I went to an inferior school. Down voltaging. But
so what is the word other than converting the voltage? Is there any other way to say that?
Step down.
Step down. Very good. Sounds somehow more elegant.
Yeah. I need to ask you though, did the fix that I sent you cure it?
I'm sure that was an integral part of it. I send it in to the engineers and it kind of disappears in the black box, and you never hear.
Set SEC to aux. That
yeah,
cures
that's
everything.
Right. That was the first thing we tried, obviously.
I'm so glad that it's back online.
Since we thought we identified it as the regulator, we do have a backup regulator, but it's in what we call the other side of the electronics. on this SIC and DH board. The problem is to get there, things are hardwired in a manner that we had to move the entire spacecraft over to that alternate side. So we were no longer just changing individual components. That meant you had to turn the entire thing off and go into what's called hardware sunpoint, turn off the central brain, the spacecraft computer, as well as the payload computer where the problem was. And that's, you know, nail biting time when you do that, because just hoping that
I know how
wakes up.
I'm biting my fingers every time I get a Windows update, you know, if I don't know what you're doing. How long does it take from the time you send a command up to the Hubble that you get the response back? It's quite a lengthy time, isn't it?
Well, it shouldn't be too bad. I mean, it's in low Earth orbit, so the transit time is not bad, but it does have to go from Goddard to usually Wallops, an antenna through TDRS, the TDRS communication satellite, and then the Hubble. So it can take a little while, at least for the high gains. The low gains go directly, but have low power, so we can only do, you know, a small number of bits at a time. But normally when we're communicating, we're waiting for a connection to the TDRS communication satellites, and those have set windows during the day. So anything that requires the high gain antennas can take, you know, a couple of hours, 8 hours before we get it. But the direct low gain omnidirectional antennas, we talk pretty continuously, and that's only a fraction of a second, I think, to go back and forth.
When you go from high gain to low gain, do you down gain it? Sorry.
Yeah. Indeed.
Real quick, somebody's got a question for you in a second, Kenneth, but if you look in the chat, folks, if anybody wants to get a copy of the perfume that Joey sent, Rich Herring found it on eBay, I think $245 or so. If you want to get your own copy of Rubicon World's Fair thing, everybody, I can just see where you're starting to type real fast to go get it. But Scott had a question for you, Ken. Is it correct that most of the bolts used in putting together the International Space Station are all the same size?
I actually have no idea. I am pretty certain that that's not the case for Hubble, but what they did when they put ISS together, I don't know. I mean, I imagine they try to standardize things as best they can, but it's, I don't know, ISS is a pretty big place with a lot of different components. I'd be a little surprised. I don't know if Carolyn happens to know that. No, okay. Yeah. You've played Stump the Astronomer and succeeded.
It was a question I was once asked with one of the Boy Scouts, because they knew I was into science, that they had read this, that most of the bolts in the ISS are 7/16. I question it because you would figure it'd be metric, given that most of the modules are not US. But it was a question.
Interesting question. I have to think about who I might even ask that to about.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay.
You know, they might call them 7/16, but I mean, I've seen specifications for spacecraft and where they have them in both units. They've just converted one to the other so that everybody knows what they're talking about. But that's really, boy, nobody's ever asked me that before. I don't know.
Hey, well, I see we've got Brent Warner on from Goddard too, so I'll put him on the spot. You have any idea? It's like one of these episodes of Star Trek where you turn over more and more of the computer to try to answer the question.
I don't know either. I don't know either, and I think the point that was made that a lot of these come from other countries means that probably there are a lot of standards involved. But I think also the point that they may have done, you know, a soft conversion, just take a metric standard and call it imperial units.
They might have actually gone for some sort of bolt that fits in both, you know, a standard, you know, holder over there and a standard holder over here. And rather than using a 1/2-inch bolt, maybe use a 7/16 because that happens to translate to a whatever millimeter, you know, bolt as well. Or maybe they had a hell of a deal on them that somebody had a whole warehouse full of 7/16 bolts they needed to use.
And then when you get down to the individual pieces of equipment, those would have been shipped up, built, you know, the stuff that sits in the equipment racks and the exercise equipment that the astronauts use. But I assume that the question that Scott was asked was about the structure of the space station itself, how the modules were all bolted together. And I don't know.
We'll have to, you guys got your homework for another time.
Yeah, indeed. You know, it's rare, I think, that you can stump all three of us on a general question like that, but you did it.
Wow. I win the door prize.
That's right. We'll have to figure out what it is.
You get a bolt.
I get the
A
ball.
7/16 bolt.
Well, again, great. As long as it has this great thing of manpower out here, if anybody would like to show me how to install a mailbox today, I have to go do that. So it's funny, the things, Carol came to me the other day, and we've been in this house 36 years, and the mailbox has been outside, and I've had to replace the mailbox itself, but the pole that it's been on has been okay. She went out the other day, opened the mailbox. You know, you open the little door. We have rural type mailboxes out here, and opened the door, and the mailbox just kept coming. It was, the pole was no longer attached to the ground. It had rusted away. So, you know, she called me and said, come out and look at this. And there's the mailbox lying there. So now I have to go and put a mailbox in, and I know all sorts about, you know, downsizing electricity or, you know, whatever, but mixing concrete and putting poles in the ground to do mailboxes. I've been trying to, you know, try the Tom Sawyer approach, go to all my neighbors and said, I bet you aren't good enough to put a mailbox in front of my house this weekend, are you? And so far, none of them have been good enough. So if anybody lives out near me and would like to put a mailbox in, come and show me how to mix concrete.
So if I understand this properly, Carol down elevated the mailbox?
Yeah. Yeah. She down elevated.
Bill, I'm sure you can find a Boy Scout to help you.
Yeah. I have to say, I wish I had a camera, because the look when Carol came in, it was like, you know, humana, the mailbox just died.
I kept trying to straighten it up and it wouldn't work.
I just did a quick calculation, and if I got it correct, 7/16 of an inch is 11.1125 millimeters. That doesn't sound like a standard metric size.
Well, that gave the government a reason to go and buy $200 wrenches then, or $2,000 wrenches.
You know, I'm feeling technically challenged myself today. I went out to, my wife usually mows the lawn, but I decided I would do it for a bit today, and had her come out and show me all the tricks on the relatively new mower. She did that. I started it up in the garage. Okay, great. Turned it off, rolled it down the hill to the backyard, turned it on, and nothing. Dead as a doornail. Redid everything, the whole sequences, put battery in and out, so nothing. Brought it back up. She couldn't find out what was wrong. We sat there kind of looking, it must be Bill Cotter's fault, and took everything apart, put it back together again, and then it started. So I have no idea, but you know, I touched it and it broke. It's been working for you know, quite some time with no issues at all. So I don't have me touch any of your hardware today. No.
They don't let you near any of the workspaces for Hubble, do they?
No, it's not when they're doing anything important. They actually, you know, this is the most people we've had on site in a long time. So they were very strict, because they knew that, you know, a lot of people might want to come in to watch or whatever. So they made it very clear that unless you were sitting there typing on a console, you were to stay away and listen remotely.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Crazy times. I don't know how many times we've all done this sort of thing. Something works, doesn't work, and it starts working again. And I didn't change anything. It just, you know, so don't ask if it goes back to work.
I don't know why this thing stopped. I don't know why it restarted, but I was glad after 15 minutes, you know, if it stopped, that would be great, because it's hot out here. Take your weather back, will you? It's getting hot here.
Yeah, we're going to be 95 today, so I'm going to go and buy the concrete today, but I'm going to dig the hole and mix it tomorrow morning, you know, early before it gets too hot. So yeah, so great fun. You know, one more thing to do. I'd love to have, you know, a World's Fair shaped mailbox or something, but no, it's going to be a generic sort of thing. So, well, thanks again, Beth, for sending me the viewer. I'm going to take a look at your 3D pictures. We will be back next week with something. I'm not sure what it will be, but appreciate everybody joining, and hope you have a great week. Oh, for the folks back east, I know particularly New York, we're getting a hell of a lot of rain. So send some of it our way, would you? We're bone dry. Everything is parched as could be. And, you know, I'm watching it, particularly over in Europe. My God, the floods are just wiping, you know, hundreds of people out and everything. It's terrible. and we're just dry as a bone out here. Then they're saying we may get thunderstorms Thursday and Friday nights, but unfortunately, that they say it has more chance of the lightning starting a fire than anything else because there won't be enough water to put out the fires. So thunderstorms will come and start fires, and we're just really thrilled about that. So it's a thrill.
Listen, even Flagstaff, Arizona got a huge flood the other day. It looked like Europe for a bit.
Michelle said it's pouring there right now. Where exactly are you, Michelle?
I'm in North New Jersey, about 10 miles away from Manhattan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, our Boy Scout camp that a number of us worked at is upstate in the Catskills, and they were just south of where the worst weather hit in New York. They were having tremendous rain and tremendous wind and everything. And it rained, I think, this is our first week of our summer camp program for this year, and I think they had 3 days of rain, and they finally had the camp out, the opening campfire several nights into it. But it's just massive storms. So. And we're out here, like I said, we're 95 degrees, sunny and miserable out. So crazy weather. Well,
Bill,
thanks all.
I
Yeah.
heard from Steve Interfield exactly what you said, because he's got a house on the other side of the mountain. He goes, it poured.
Yeah. Well, for those of us that were there in the summer of '69, it was incredible rain. And we had one period of time it rained 13 days out of 14 days. We ran camping periods for 14 days at a time. And these kids came up and got 13 days of rain out of 14 days. If any of them ever came back, I don't know. But it got so bad that our camp has a lake, and you normally go from the admin building down across a bridge up to the main part of the building and or the main part of the camp, and the bridge now had water running over it, so you could no longer get there. And of course, now that you can't get to the main part of camp, that's when a kid decides, I'm going to get appendicitis, and you got to get me out of here. So that's when, does anybody own a helicopter that would like to fly in this? The weather was absolutely unbelievable. Carlos was there during that point in time. It was the worst summer ever, and I would kill to go back and do it all over again. It was just, we had two guys that decided to take, we have a dam forms our lake, and then a stream that comes out that's mostly just, a couple inches of water. Well, these guys decided to see what it would be like to canoe from our camp, and it eventually drains down to the Delaware River. And their problem now became that when they get the bridges, the water was going over the bridges that, normally there's 20 feet of air or something, and the water was that high. They would have to portage the bridges and go over the bridges in the canoe. And they got way the hell down. I mean, amazing trip. Where today you couldn't even float a toy boat down that stream, and they canoed half the way out to the Delaware. So amazing trip.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
Real quick side story on the rain. About 14 years ago, I led a Cub Scout pack to Central Florida, up to Titusville area, where we camped out for 2 nights at one of the parks up there. The intent was to go to Kennedy Space Center on Saturday and tour around and look at everything, which we had done. It was a great tour, but these were a bunch of young, new Cub Scouts who really hadn't camped yet. Maybe one night they had camped, but on a long weekend camp out like that, the parents hadn't really camped either. So Friday night we got there and it was great, but Saturday we got back and we had impeding storms coming in that we had to cancel the campfire. And about 8 o'clock at night, this big storm just came through Florida and just pounded everybody. And it rained all night. And some of these parents, they never came back to Cub Scouts again because they just couldn't handle it. To me, I thought it was one of the best nights camping. I mean, it was raining all night on the tent, and it was, I was of course accustomed to it, but lost a few Cub Scouts that night because their parents just were not accustomed to camping out in the rain like that. But at least we had a nice day on Saturday touring Kennedy Space Center and going to the complex, and they took us on the bus out to the launch area to the vehicle assembly building and out to the path halfway, to where there was an observation tower that you could look at out on pad 38 and 39, 39, 40, 39A, 40A. So it was a great day, but the fact it was on that Saturday night we got back and we just got hammered by this big storm all night long. And they were, like I said, some of the Cub Scout parents just. were
Oh
not
yeah,
accustomed
they
to
would
that.
freak.
They
Scott
freaked.
put up a link to the camp we're talking about, and Richard is up there right now and said his tent got christened by 2 storms. If you've never been through a thunderstorm, you have to go through a thunderstorm in the Catskills. The way the thunder just echoes from hill to hill to hill. I mean, that's why they did the whole thing with the various legends up there and everything. It's just impressive. And I may have mentioned this in another talk. When I first time I went up there as a scout, 11 years old, we had a storm come through there that night with thunder and lightning, and it dropped trees down all over the place. And I can understand why a kid might not want to come back or a parent want to come back, because you wake up in the morning and you see this giant tree. I mean, huge tree lying 3 feet away from your tent, thinking that could have come down on my tent. But and forgive me if I've told this story in one of these talks before. We went outside, and this tent this tree was right between 2 tents. We were damn lucky to be alive. And the scoutmaster, we went over to look at it, and the scoutmaster yells, "Don't touch it! Don't touch it! Don't anybody touch that tree! It's electrified." And we're 11 years old. We don't know anything, right? We're going, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, it got hit like a lightning, and trees are 42% water, and they hold a charge, and that thing could still be charged. I've got to drain off the electricity." And we're all, "Oh, wow," stepping back. So he goes over to it, and he takes a knife, and he puts a thing, into a slit into the tree, and he says, I'm making sure I'm not grounded." Puts another slit into it, and walks over. He plugs in an electric razor, turns it on, and starts shaving. And says, "Oh yeah, I'm draining down the tree." We're, oh my God, we're just amazed. Well, I'm 11. I had no idea about a battery-powered razor. I was just scared to death. And then afterwards, what was funny, some kids, he says, "I think it's safe now." And other kids would go over, "Oh, yeah, I'm touching it. You can still feel a tingle. There's still a charge in there." The things you all convince yourself of. But 11 years old, I was scared to death of that electric tree in the middle of my campsite.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, never forgot it.
Good one.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, we had encouraged one of the awards that we gave Cub Scouts. For camping, we gave them camping beads. So every time a Cub Scout went camping, at the monthly pack meeting, we awarded them a camping bead. And, we had a lanyard that they gave them. Eventually they'd end up with a string of beads, but there was the elusive, well sought after, highly rare to get black camping bead. And the black camping bead was for scouts who had camped overnight in the rain. Now, if we had gone on a 2-day camp out, and it rained all day Saturday, but it hadn't rained, if it didn't rain Friday night, but it rained maybe parts of the day Saturday, but it didn't rain Saturday night, you don't get a bead. It pretty much had to rain the whole weekend, or at least a good portion of the night. So it could have been a nice day, but then the storm comes through like it did when we took the Cub Scouts up to Kennedy, and where it rained all night, where then they would earn the elusive black camping bead. And I had taken a pack out to our local park out here west of the county for their first camping trip for the fall season. And it had done the same thing, and it was nice during the day, but at night we had this big storm come through, and it rained all through the night. Well, unfortunately, one of the new Cub Scout dads, got a little, scared, and packed up his son and took him home for the night. But they showed up nice, bright and early the next morning, for breakfast and to break down camp and whatever it was. So come around the pack meeting at the end of the month, those scouts who were standing in line were being awarded their black camping bead. And this one boy comes up, and I just had to tell him he had not earned the black camping bead. And, to his dismay, he cried and ran away and things like that. But the sheer fact of the matter was, because he did not stay through the night, and unfortunately it was his father's choice to do that. The kid probably wanted to, but the dad was probably more of a wimp in my mind, and took the son home. But, he had to stay through the night, in order to earn the bead. And this poor kid was in tears because he just did not earn the bead. And it was sad. I mean, it was sad for me because I would have liked to have given it to him. But the fact is, he didn't earn it.
Everybody today gets a participation trophy.
Yeah,
That's
and
the
that's what's
trouble.
terrible. That's
Yeah.
what's terrible.
I got to kick Tom Brooks. Thanks for the story, Baron. Tom
Yeah.
Brooks was mentioning he played a coyote CD at a camping trip, and the next day people not only heard the coyotes, they saw them. Yeah, it's amazing how people will, you know, take a power of suggestion, electric trees or coyotes or things like that, and you know, they just all want to be part of the experience. And if you saw a coyote, I saw 3 of them. You know, well, you saw 3 of them. I had 4 of them lick my feet. You know, it's amazing how stories go.
Yeah. Well, let's go look for some snipe.
Oh yeah. Well, we are having a big reunion camping trip. If anybody would like to come to Onto Earth, has been there before, we're hoping you come back. If you've never been there and would like to join us in the mid-September, we're going to be up there, and we will. We can almost guarantee rain. We cannot necessarily guarantee thunderstorms in September, but we never really worry about that camp burning down. You know, because unless water can catch fire, that camp is probably pretty safe. I mean, it's very wet up there. It's right where the New York City's main water supply is, to give you an idea of how much it rains up there. But we are going up in September, and if you're up there in this rain, we'll give you a black bead, and if you stay up there long enough, you'll turn green, like everything up there gets covered in lichen or stuff. But if anybody's interested and would love to do it, we can even do a talk of some kind around the lake and have a fun time. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a bunch of the guys on here in September. All things got the fingers crossed that COVID does not come roaring back. We're going through another lockdown of sorts here in LA, and I'm just hoping that by September it's safe to get on an airplane and come back and swap lives around the fire again. So. See folks next week. And Utah, 15% of precipitation. I think we're at 0. So we've had no rain this year. It's been unbelievable. Actually, we did get rain. Carol, what was it? Tuesday. There was some rain in other parts of LA on Tuesday because one of my
I
patrol.
don't think, yeah, but it wasn't here.
But just the other side of the valley, because my patrol partner was out. She was 3 miles away from here and said, "Hey, I had to put the windshield wipers on." And we're in the backyard. We had been out walking the dog, said, "Well, it looks like it could rain." And then people on the other side of the valley, it was coming down pretty good for about a half hour. We, of course, got nothing. So, but
Well, come to Fort Lauderdale. We've had rain all week, and we're going to have it again next week. So
I'll put a pipe in. We'll buy it from you.
I'll put it in some containers, ship it out.
Fill up some perfume bottles from the World's
Yeah,
Fair.
there you go. Right,
All right.
yeah.
Okay. We'll see you folks next week, and I hope everybody has a great one. Take care.
Thanks, Bill.
All right. Bye.
Bye.